At WinOwl, we tell stories that aren't comfortable, but are necessary. Stories about couples, families, and decisions that leave quiet scars. If you like listening to tales that feel almost like a midnight confession, hit subscribe to WinOwl right now, leave a like, and share this audio with someone who might need to think twice about what they call love or protection. What I'm going to tell you today is not a funny story about mothers-in-law. It's the autopsy of a relationship, done with a cold scalpel. A wedding that almost got signed, and a contract that very nearly killed more than just the romance. In this story, there was a mother who used to be a lawyer, a fiancée who was underestimated, and a son who looked the other way until it was too late. The dilemma is easy to say, but hard to live. What weighs more, inherited fear or respect for the person you love? Listen until the end and then tell me what you would have done in my place. And I'll say it again, if stories like this stir something inside you, subscribe, like this episode and share it, that way I know I'm not talking into the void. I'm going to say it straight, my mother always had more faith in contracts than in people. And for years, I believed that was just being prudent. Now, I'm not so sure. My name is Jasper, I'm 35, and I was a few signatures away from marrying a woman my mother considered a good girl, as long as she knows her place. That woman's name is Helen. And the day my mother tried to lock her into a prenup, thinking she was protecting her from me, was the day she unknowingly left me standing naked in front of her, as a man, as a son, and as a coward. Let me ask you something, right from the start. If the person you love asked you to sign a contract to protect themselves from you, would you be offended, or would you see it as normal in times like these? I grew up listening to war stories, divorce war stories. My mother, Zoe, was a family lawyer for 20 years. Her stories were always the same: women who ruined men, wives who kept the house, the alimony, the business, years of work thrown in the trash. Women always come out on top, she'd repeat while serving dinner, like reciting a proverb. That's why a man has to be smart. My father died when I was 12. There was no divorce, no legal battle, but my mother's mind stayed trapped in other people's wars. In the end, the ghosts of other marriages sat at the table with us. I learned to see love as something beautiful, as long as there was an exit plan. When I met Helen, none of that mattered. Not because of some movie-style romantic love. I'm not that naive. It was simpler than that, the way she looked at me without rushing, as if my resume and my last name didn't impress her at all, completely disarmed me. We met at a small photography exhibit. I was bored, holding a glass of wine that was far too expensive, pretending to care. She stood in front of a black and white photo of a woman waiting at a train station. "Look at her hands," she said, without even saying hello. "She's not gripping the suitcase. That means she's already decided to leave, she's just waiting for her body to catch up." I didn't know what to say. I laughed from sheer nerves. She turned toward me. Her hair was pulled up in a somewhat chaotic bun, she wore a simple gray dress and a denim jacket. Nothing flashy. But her eyes, there was a kind of calm in them I didn't recognize. That night, we walked several blocks together. It was cold. The wind kept lifting the hem of her dress a little, and every now and then her arm brushed against mine. Nothing explicit happened, just an awareness of the exact distance between our bodies. The smell of her soft perfume mixed with the distant smoke from street food stalls. When she stopped in front of her building, she looked at me up close. I felt her warm breath against my chin. "You don't look happy with your life," she said, almost like a diagnosis. "But you're very good at hiding it." That sentence went straight through me. Let me ask you, how many times has someone read your sadness that accurately on a first date? Helen told me very little about herself at first. I knew she worked at a tech startup, that she did product and operations, that she had a small team. It sounded important, but like many men, I'll admit it, I heard startup and thought experimental phase, nothing serious. What I did see was her schedule: late meetings, calls in English, nights in front of her laptop. And even so, she made room for me. I remember one night in my apartment. The city sounded far away, as if only the light could get in through the window, not the noise. Helen was sitting at my dining table with her laptop open, wearing one of my old t-shirts that barely reached mid-thigh, her hair down and messy. Her bare legs crossed and uncrossed absent-mindedly while she reviewed a document. I pretended to read, but I kept watching her from the corner of my eye. The glow of the screen traced the curve of her neck, the line of her collarbone, the subtle rise and fall of her chest as she breathed. I walked up behind her and placed my hands on her shoulders. I felt the warmth of her skin, the small shiver in her breath as my fingers slid down, turning a simple massage into something slower than it needed to be. "If you keep that up, I'm never finishing this," she whispered, without taking her eyes off the screen, but tilting her head slightly toward my hand. That soft, contained tension was our language. Long kisses in the kitchen, her hands clutching my shirt, my mouth lost in the curve of her neck while the water on the stove boiled far too long. Nothing I'm going to spell out here, but enough for you to know we wanted each other. So, a year later, I asked her to marry me. I didn't make a big production out of it. Dinner at my place, a simple ring, a bottle of wine we both liked. When I showed her the ring, Helen went quiet for a few seconds. She didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't put on the show my mother would have expected. She just rested her forehead on my chest, took a deep breath and said, "I never planned on getting married, Jasper. But with you, I'm less afraid of being wrong." What would you think if someone answered you like that? I took it as an imperfect yes. A real, human yes. I thought it was beautiful. The problem started when my mother stepped in. Zoe didn't scream or make a scene. She attacked with smiles. The first time we told her about the engagement, she looked at both of us and said, "I'm happy for you, really. Helen, you're lovely. It's obvious you make him happy." Pause. She took a sip of coffee. Then, like someone commenting on the weather, she added, "We just have to be smart, that's all. Jasper has family assets, joint accounts with his uncles, investments. You know, things that need to be protected. Not out of distrust, just as a precaution. With my experience as a lawyer, I can help you with a very simple prenup." Helen nodded slowly. I felt the discomfort like a weight in my stomach, but I didn't say anything. My mother went on, in lecture mode. "These days it's normal. Women understand. Besides, sweetheart," she looked at Helen, "never at me, you work, but we all know statistically women never end up earning as much as men, especially if they want to have kids. It's just common sense." I remember Helen's silence. Her eyes darkened just a shade, a tiny shift. She picked up her cup, brought it to her lips, but didn't drink. I squeezed her knee under the table, trying to say, "Ignore her, we'll talk about it later." But we didn't talk. Or rather, we talked too late. Let me ask you, if you were in her place, would that sentence have hurt you? Or would you have brushed it off as mother-in-law talk? That night, back at my apartment, Helen sat on the bed, legs crossed, staring at the floor. I was standing in the doorway, unbuttoning my shirt. "Do you care about the prenup?" she asked, without looking up. The truth is, I hadn't really thought about it. Not seriously. My mother had been telling me for years, when you get married, please, do things right from the start. So, with no malice, with very little reflection, I said, "I don't think it's a problem. It's just something formal. It doesn't change how I feel." When she finally looked up, I saw something like exhaustion in her eyes. "For you, it doesn't change how you feel," she said. "For me, it changes what you believe about me. That's not the same." That's where I should have stopped. I should have asked her, "What do you need? What makes you feel safe?" But I did what so many of us do when something makes us uncomfortable. I minimized it. "Hey," I said softly as I walked over and sat down beside her, my hand sliding slowly up her thigh, reaching for physical reconciliation. "My mom is dramatic. We'll keep it simple, no drama. Trust me." I felt her muscles tense under my hand. She didn't pull away, but she didn't soften either. She kissed me, yes, but it was a different kind of kiss. Slower. Sadder. Her mouth tasted like wine and resignation. Tell me, how many times has the body said no while the mouth says it's fine? The following weeks were a blur of emails, drafts, and my mother's professional comments. Zoe was thrilled. It was like she'd become a lawyer again. She would send me clauses on WhatsApp at any hour. Make sure it's clear that any assets acquired before the marriage are untouchable. We have to specify that, in the event of divorce, there will be no spousal support for the wife, given that she's capable of working. It would be good to include that if one of them stops working by choice, they can't later make any claims on the other's income. I read those messages on my phone while Helen cooked, or while she sat next to me on the couch. And I didn't show her everything. I summarized. I filtered, thinking I was sparing her the bad taste of legal language. Do you think that was protection, or just cowardice? One night, she found one of the printed drafts on my desk. I was in the shower. When I came out, I saw her sitting in the chair, the paper in her hands. Her brow was furrowed, her lower lip pressed tight. Explicit waiver of any financial claims arising from domestic work, childcare, or indirect support of the husband's professional career, she read out loud. How poetic, this romantic legalese. I froze. Steam was still spilling out of the bathroom, and there I was, a towel around my waist, feeling more exposed than I ever had in my life. She looked up at me. Did you write this, or did your mom? It's a draft. We can change it. But you didn't, she replied. And you didn't show it to me, either. I didn't know what to say. I walked closer, still dripping water. She followed a droplet as it slid from my collarbone down under the towel. There was a second of strange tension. It could have led us to make up, to turn the argument into sex, the way some couples do. But it didn't. Helen stood up, set the paper on the desk, and took a step back. I'm not stupid, Jasper. I know your accounts are bigger than mine. That doesn't bother me. What bothers me is that this paper is written as if I were a threat or a maid. Let me ask you something directly. If your partner said that to you, would you sit down and listen, or would you go on the defensive? I defended myself. That's not what it is. It's just, this is the standard language. My mom's seen it all, she just wants to protect us. Of course, she nodded, bitterly. The women who destroy men. The gold diggers. The same old monster. She crossed her arms. I saw her bite her tongue, like she was holding something back. What are you not saying, Helen? I asked. Silence. Then she let out a short, humorless laugh. Nothing. I just find it ironic, that's all. Ironic how? And right then she was about to tell me something that would have changed everything, but she stopped herself. Nothing, Jasper, she repeated. Sign whatever you have to sign. Just tell me what day I have to stand in front of the notary. She went to bed. I stayed in the study for a while, the paper in my hand, staring at that phrase, domestic work, childcare. In my head, I could hear my mother saying, you have to make things clear from the beginning, son. That way you avoid problems later on. That night we barely touched the subject. In bed, our backs felt like two distant shores. A few hours later, in the early dawn, I felt her turn, reaching for me. Her hand slid across my chest, her fingers resting there, trembling a little, as if they were unsure. I reacted, pulled her toward me, our bodies fitting together out of habit. The tension was still there, though. Our breathing quickened, skin against skin, my lips on her neck, her nails tracing lightly down my back. But even in the desire, I could feel an invisible wall. We made love, or something close to it. And when she fell asleep, I stayed staring at the ceiling, painfully aware that something had cracked. 2 weeks went by before the final showdown. My mother insisted on organizing a dinner to talk about the agreement and some details of the wedding. Zoe's house always smelled like expensive disinfectant and roses. Everything was in its place. That night, the dining room looked like a stage: spotless tablecloth, gleaming glasses, an elaborate pasta dish no one was hungry enough to eat. Helen arrived on time, in a simple black dress, her hair pulled back into a low ponytail. She wore a fine, subtle chain around her neck. She looked calm, but her hands were cold when I took them. "I don't want to fight," she whispered to me before we went in. "I just want clarity." Have you ever gone to a dinner knowing that, somehow, when it's over, your life will be split in two? The three of us sat down. My mother smiled a lot. "Too much." "Well," she began, "we're almost there. Just a few minor details left in the prenup and that's it. I really don't want this to overshadow the joy. It's just the responsible thing to do." She pulled out a folder. Opened it, pleased. Started to explain clauses. All I could hear was a buzzing in my ears. Helen listened in silence, her back straight. And then my mother took it one step further. "There is one thing I'd really like to make very clear," she said, folding her hands. "Jasper has a very demanding professional life. Projects, travel, meetings. Meanwhile, your work, Helen, is more flexible. And of course, when you have children, the natural thing is that you'll cut back your workload a bit. It's fine, it's normal. Women are better at that." Helen raised an eyebrow. "I didn't know it had already been decided who's cutting back on what," she replied, her voice soft. "It's not deciding," my mother rushed to say, "it's just reality. Women never end up earning as much money as men, not in the long run. And that's okay, there's nothing wrong with that. But it does mean that if, someday, things don't work out, it wouldn't make sense for you to claim part of what Jasper has built. He's always going to contribute more. That's why, when I talk about submission in the home, I don't mean it negatively, I mean complementarity." Then came the silence. A thick silence. I looked at Helen. She didn't snap. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't do what a lot of people would have done: explode. She just took a deep breath. Carefully placed her napkin on the table. And she smiled. A smile I'd never seen on her before, cold, surgical. "Zoe," she said, "can I ask you something, just so I understand?" "Of course, dear." "When you say that women can never earn as much as men, are you speaking from personal experience or from lack of information?" My mother shifted in her seat. I could tell, because I know her. Her fingers started to play with her wedding ring, the one she still wore, even though my father was gone. "I'm speaking from statistics," she replied. "And trust me, I've seen too many cases. Besides, I know how much Jasper makes, I know what most men in his circle make. And don't get me wrong, it's not that your work isn't valuable, but..." She turned to me, looking for backup. "Jasper, explain it to her. You know this is how it is. I don't want her to feel less, I just want..." Helen cut in, still calm. "That's fine," she said. "Let's talk about reality, then." She leaned back slightly in her chair. Looked at me, then at her. "Last time you and I talked about my work, Zoe, I told you I was at a tech startup, remember?" Yes, something modern, apps, that kind of thing. "And I think you assumed that meant I'm barely scraping by, playing pretend entrepreneur, and that Jasper is the one bringing in the real money." My mother made a vague gesture with her hand. "I wouldn't put it exactly like that, but yes, son, you..." Helen interrupted again, with that precision I've only ever seen in people who know exactly where to cut. "I get it. The word startup sounds fragile. But let me tell you something we probably should have shared earlier." She leaned forward. Her voice was low, but every word landed with weight. "I own 23% of the company. I started as an employee, yes, but 2 years ago my partners offered me equity in exchange for taking over operations, product, and expansion. I didn't say yes out of romance, I said yes because we did the math. For the past year, my annual income, between salary and profit share, has been higher than Jasper's. Not by a lot, but higher. And if the launch we have scheduled in 3 months goes well, the projected investment would multiply the value of my stake by 5. My mother's fork hit the plate with a sharp clink. I felt my heart in my throat. Not because I minded that she earned more than me, but because I didn't know. Not like that. Not in those concrete terms. I had never asked her that deeply. I'd never really been that interested. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. If you found out, over dinner, that your partner makes more money than you and you didn't know because you never bothered to ask, what would that say about you? Helen went on, without malice, like she was reading out a report. I'm not saying any of this to brag. I'm saying it because I find it curious that someone without all the information assumes that in this relationship I'm the weak side, the one who'll be financially dependent, the one who's supposed to sign a waiver renouncing any kind of compensation. Technically, if anyone here is taking a financial risk, it's me. My mother had gone pale. I watched her blink rapidly, like her brain was trying to rearrange reality to fit her prejudices. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words just wouldn't come. Zoe pulled herself together a little. Straightened her back. Clung to her ex-lawyer role. That doesn't change the fundamentals, she said, her voice harder now. The greater risk is still on Jasper's side. The company can fail, the numbers might not work out. The family assets, on the other hand, are there, solid. What I want to avoid is that, in a crisis, you might take advantage. Take advantage? Helen repeated, tilting her head. That's a fascinating choice of words. Another silence. The tension was thick enough to slice through. I'll be honest with you, Zoe, she went on. I was willing to sign a prenup. I understand fear. I understand wanting to protect what you've built with your son. I really do. What I was no longer sure about signing is this particular document, the one that basically reduces me to a domestic role with no rights to anything, even if I'm contributing as much or more. And now that I see how little you actually knew about me, about what I do, what I earn, I understand what the real goal was. What real goal? My mother snapped, defensive. Helen's eyes were shining. Not with tears. With clarity. That I be, above all, functional to your idea of a family, submissive, available, in charge of the house, the kids, and your son's emotional care. That the agreement not only protect money, but also remind me of my place. It's not a financial contract. It's a behavior manual. That sentence went straight through me. I had never seen it that way. In my head, they were papers. But all at once, I saw how they looked from the other side. Have you ever looked at the same document from the point of view of the so-called weaker party signing it? That's when my mother dropped the mask. Look, young lady, she said, losing the sweet tone. Don't get confused. I don't hate you, I don't look down on you. I like you. But I know how things are. If you earn more right now, good for you. But it won't always be that way. When you have kids, you'll have to choose. And a man who breaks his back for his family doesn't deserve to have a wife show up one day and claim half of everything just because she feels unappreciated. I don't want my son to be one of those men a woman strips of everything because she didn't feel valued. Helen stared at her for a long moment. Then she looked at me. And you, Jasper, she asked. What don't you want? Never had such a simple question hurt so much. I looked at my mother. Then at her. I could feel loyalty pulling me in opposite directions. And this is where I want to ask you directly. If you were in my chair, with your mother on one side and your fiancé on the other, who would you say no to? I took a breath. I don't want anyone to feel used, I said at last. Not you, Mom, and not you, Helen. We can adjust the prenup. We'll remove the clauses you find offensive. We can make something more balanced, based on our actual situation. My mother looked at me like I'd just betrayed her. Jasper. Mom, please, I cut in. It's not fair. Helen shook her head. No, Jasper. You're too late, she said quietly. It's not about the paper anymore. It's that your mother knows exactly how she thinks, and you did too, and you still let this go on. Her eyes grew wet, but she didn't cry. You knew she was seeing me as a potential threat, some kind of housewife with delusions of grandeur, and you went along with it. Because it was easier for you than confronting her. I couldn't argue. She was right. I just didn't want problems, I managed. And now you have them, she replied. She stood up. Picked up her bag. My mother stood too, agitated. Don't be dramatic, Helen, she said. Don't throw away a relationship over a legal misunderstanding. Helen let out a short, dry laugh. I'm not throwing away a relationship over a piece of paper, Zoe. I'm acknowledging that this piece of paper just put into writing what was already in your heads. She turned to me one last time. I'm not going to marry someone who doesn't know whether he can afford to lose more money than I can, but who's already lost me and hasn't even noticed yet. And then she left. The sound of the door closing was louder than all the arguments we never had. That night, my mother tried to convince me it had all been an overreaction from a proud woman. I went back to my apartment. Sat on the floor with the prenup folder open, reading every clause as if it were the first time. Suddenly, I saw it all, the tone, the wording, the implications. It wasn't just numbers. It was, like Helen said, a manual for how she had to behave in order to be acceptable. Let me ask you. At what point do we let fear dress up as common sense and tear down basic trust? Days went by. Helen didn't answer my messages. She replied to one email, cold, saying she needed space, that the wedding was on hold, that we could talk when I actually knew what I wanted. I refused to accept it. I went to her apartment. She didn't open the door. I could hear her crying on the other side, and I was cowardly enough not to insist, not to make a scene. I left. A month later, I saw her name in a business article. Latina startup closes multi-million funding round led by young team. Her photo was in the center. Dark suit, controlled smile, steady eyes. The text referred to Helen as co-founder and COO. Co-founder. Not lucky employee. Not Jasper's girlfriend. I felt proud. And ashamed. Proud of her. Ashamed of myself for taking so long to really see her. I talked to my mother. She tried to defend herself. All that equity stuff is smoke, she said. Those companies go up and down. A house, land, that's what's real. That's not the point, Mom, I cut in. The point is you never cared who she was beyond how she fit into your little scheme. Zoe was offended. She told me I was taking a stranger's side instead of hers. But the truth is, I wasn't fully on anyone's side anymore. I was in no man's land, trying to understand at what point I'd stop seeing the woman I was going to marry as a whole person. I'm not the victim of this story. Helen isn't the villain, either. My mother is not some movie monster. She's a frightened woman, shaped by years of seeing the worst of people in courtrooms. But fear, when you mix it with power and prejudice, turns into violence, even if it shows up in the form of a legal clause. Months later, Helen agreed to see me. We met in a small cafe, mid-afternoon. She arrived in a light blazer, jeans, her hair down. She looked bigger. Not older, just larger in presence. We greeted each other with an awkward hug. Her perfume was still the same. Congratulations on the investment, I said. She smiled, faintly. Thank you. There was a silence. Then I spoke, the way I'm talking to you now, no embellishments. What happened with the prenup? I was a coward. I don't have another word for it. I didn't want to confront my mother, I didn't want to question her fears. I preferred to treat it like paperwork. And I used you as a buffer. She nodded, like someone who already knows the diagnosis. I know. And I should have told you everything about the company earlier too. Not because you were entitled to it, but because it would have changed the conversation. I was scared of coming off as arrogant, you know? Scared of being too much. So I let myself be shrunk a little. That part's on me. Do you think we could try again? I asked, bluntly, feeling my throat tighten. She took a sip of coffee. Looked out the window. Then she looked straight at me. I love you, Jasper, she said. That hasn't changed. But now I know love doesn't make up for certain things. I need the man I'm with to have the courage to say no to what's wrong, even when it comes from his own blood. And you're still in the process of learning that. Her words weren't cruel. They were precise. I don't want you to sign a contract to be with me, she went on. I want you to sign a different kind of contract with yourself, that you won't let someone else's fear decide what I deserve. I felt something break and fall into place at the same time. I'm losing you, aren't I? I asked. Helen drew a deep breath. I'm letting you go, she corrected. There's a difference. If one day you learn how to set boundaries, maybe we'll cross paths again somewhere else. But I can't wait for you at the altar. We said goodbye with a long hug. Her body against mine still felt like familiar ground. I felt the warmth of her chest, the restrained rhythm of her breathing, her hands pressing into my back as if, for a second, she hesitated. Then she stepped away. I watched her walk down the street, steady, like the woman in that black and white photo from the first night. She'd already decided to leave, she was just waiting for her body to follow. Now I'm talking to you from a more empty apartment, with fewer pieces of furniture and more silence. I still talk to my mother, but our conversations are shorter. I've gone to therapy. I've learned to see contracts as tools, not shields. And when I think of Helen, I don't picture her as the fiancée who left, but as the mirror that showed me the kind of man I was, and the kind I might still become if I find the courage. So let me ask you, since you've stayed with me this far. Do you think Helen overreacted by breaking off the engagement? Do you think my mother was just looking out for me? Would you have signed a prenup like that, knowing what it implied, or would you have laid down conditions? The truth is, sometimes the most dangerous contracts aren't signed in ink, but in silence. I signed a lot of silence against myself, and I lost the woman I said I loved. And even though I sleep a little better now that I've looked my cowardice in the eye, I still think of her every time I see a woman at a train station, suitcase hanging loose from her hands. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive her, or if I'll just learn to forgive myself. But there is one thing I am sure of, I'm never again going to confuse control with protection, or submission with love. If this story left something spinning around in your head, I want you to tell me. What would you have done in my place? Do you think Helen should give me another chance if one day I show up with clearer boundaries, with a different internal contract? Or do you think there are mistakes that simply mark a before and after you can't walk back from? I'll be reading you in the comments. And if you want to keep listening to confessions like this from people who love, mess up, lose, and sometimes learn, subscribe to the WinOwl channel, leave a like, and share this story with someone who's thinking about signing something, whether it's a contract or a silence that might cost them far too much.